And to get a deeper understanding of the government's target and can it be met. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon.
Right. So, as you heard me say just now, the governments are aiming to reduce lower extreme poverty to 0% by 2024. I just want to get your overall take on this. Is this a realistic and feasible target?
I think that is very overshoot target by the government because the government must have two very serious issues. The first one is about the cyclical factors. That's why the poverty rate is increased in general, not only extreme poverty, but also about the inflation rate, and also make many of the poor household pay more. Transportation, fuel expenses also increase. So this is make it harder. And also from the cyclical point of view, that right now Indonesia is still on the process of the recovery. We still don't know when the global economic conditions is affecting many of the livelihood, cost of living in many of the rural area also. So in the second one, it's about the structural problems of the poverty. In Indonesia, many of the poor household or poor family tend to have poor children and so on. So it's like a race to the bottom from the poor household because of the access of the educations, access to better sanitations, access to healthcare.
Yeah.
So many of the structural problems also need to be addressed by the government.
All right. So, first of all, I want to talk about extreme poverty. So just to make it clear to the audience and to the public, how is extreme poverty different, from poverty, and just paint us a picture of the extreme poverty situation in Indonesia. A picture of the extreme poverty situation in Indonesia. Is it more cyclical? Is it seasonal? Or just tell us the characteristic of extreme poverty in Indonesia.
So if we divide the general poverty, so we have a poverty rate right now in Indonesia around 550,000 rupiah per month per capita. Right. So one household with four numbers of the member family, they need to increase their income more than 2 million rupiah. So any of the family having below the poverty rate of the 2 million, so it considered as a poor household. Meanwhile, the extreme poverty is the poor household, which is in the very lower decile or very lower percentage portions of the poverty rate. So if we're talking about the extreme poverty, it means that this people is actually in the bottom of the poverty line. So this become a structural problem. Before the pandemic, they already become a poor, and during the pandemic, they suffer a lot.
Right. So when you talk about the structural, just tell us more about, is it the education, or is it maybe just their surroundings? Is it the lack of jobs?
So it's more like many factors contribute to the increasing number of the extreme poverty.
Yeah.
So if you're talking about the educations, yes, the education seems accessible, but for middle income families. Meanwhile, the kids coming from the poor household, especially in the rural area, perhaps there is a school infrastructures, but not enough of the teachers, the high quality teachers in that area is also affecting. And meanwhile, the middle income or upper middle income populations can have extracurriculars. They can have extra lessons apart from the school curriculum. Meanwhile, the poor household is need to pay extra money to get a better quality of the educations outside or inside the school system. And also, if we're talking about the healthcare, there's been progress with the BPJS or National Healthcare Provider Services. However, there are many of the poor households seems like not involved in that kind of the system, especially if we're talking about the people who living in the border, living in the small island or outer province of Indonesia. They may have BPJS or may not, but the healthcare services, healthcare facilities, the number of specialist doctor is not there. So the lack of the equal access of the healthcare in general. But if you're talking about the number of the job opportunity, this is more like not structural, it's more like a seasonal.
Yeah.
So when there is a farming season, many of these poor household, which is majority of the poor household is in the farming sectors, they work in the farm. But when there is no farming or the food of the plantation they sell is below the average normal price, they might choose to become a jobless or they choose another occupancy which is very, very lower income for them. So it combinations between the structural and then also cyclical problems.
Right. So now that we have a better picture of extreme poverty in Indonesia, the government said that one of the main programs to reduce extreme poverty to 0% was the use of social aid funds. So basically giving out direct cash to those in extreme poverty by 300,000 rupiah per family, if I'm not wrong. Is that sufficient enough to reduce poverty, extreme poverty to 0%?
So if we look at the data of the social assistance portion compared with the GDP, gross domestic product, the Indonesia, even during the pandemic, where many countries increased their social assistance program, in the Indonesia itself, the government portion of the social assistance program is only 2.2% of the GDP. What is the ideal numbers? The ideal numbers is above 5% of the GDP. So in terms of the budget, yes, we need to increase, but there is also another issue about the data, for instance, how to verify the data, how to make sure that this poor household getting a lot of the attention from the local government, from the central government, so they receive the social assistance is exactly the same amount. And we're talking about the corruptions, we're talking about the inefficiency of the bureaucracy. I think the critics recently that we have more than 400 trillion rupiah of the social assistance program in the general. But the number of the meeting, the number of the traveling for the officers is quite high portions of that total amount of social assistance. So if we're talking about the social assistance, we're not also talking about how to making the technology, how to improve the innovation of the social assistance to achieve more targeted and also efficiency in the bureaucracy itself.
All right, but in terms of the social assistance, once if it becomes more effective, is that it? Is that just a solution, or there must be more? Because, for example, 60% of the workforce in Indonesia, there are junior high school graduates, 60% of the workforce. So does education, sort of improving education, should be more of the target here instead of just social assistance? What's your take?
Yeah, social assistance is just one part of the solutions. So we need another, which is the structural solutions. How to bring more job, how to bring more quality of the investments, how to bring more quality of the education and healthcare, how to bring down the food price. So the food price is we see as a problem because right now the food swing, it means that is as a farmer, many of the poor households rely on the farming. They get relatively cheaper price but higher production costs. Meanwhile, as a consumers, they also receive higher price of the food price. So we need to solve this kind of a problem of the agriculture sector, farming sectors, bring down the inflations of the food in the consumer side, but bring more welfare to the farmer side. So social assistance need to be completed or need to be integrated with the other government program to increase the number of the middle class and decrease the number of the extreme poverty also.
Right. Now, in terms of inflation, of course, not only Indonesia, but around the world, we've seen soaring inflation in the US, in Europe, in almost every country around the world. Most of that is also due to food supplies, and that sort of ties into Russia-Ukraine war, as both are major exporters and producers of food. So with that in mind, is the possibility of reducing extreme poverty to 0% realistic, seeing as food prices and how they have become higher is a really big issue at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's very, very big issue, and the government need to concern more about bring down the price of the rice in the consumers levels, also bring down the transportation costs, cutting the middleman, cutting the distribution costs, and also another commodity right now, the cooking oil or vegetable cooking oil need also to be available, especially if we perceive that during the Ramadan and Lebaran, the price will be increased dramatically. And also because the reopening of the economy also bring up the demand and creating more fluctuations in the food price or food inflations. So this inflations is seasonal, yes, but also the impact of the world supply chain disruptions also impacting the food price. So the government must act, but just be careful, not only government solving the problem with the import food like a rice import. They want to open many of the food import, but also the government need to take care how this kind of the policy is effective enough and also not hurt the farmer side. Because if the government want to stabilize the price with the import food from abroad, for example, the rice and also garlic and also many of the food product, it may hurt the farmers and it might hurt the target or ambition to bring down the extreme poverty later on.